what should be number one on a Black agenda?
So I have 6 things. I know you said 5.
Well, 6 is incomplete.
I know.
So either give us 7
I
or
figure
5.
between mine, Drew, we're gonna get to 7.
All right, let's get it.
I had Voting Rights Act, restoration of the Voting Rights Act, but with universal application. Previously, the Voting Rights Act.
That's number one.
That's my number one.
Is it?
Because, and here's why: if you cannot sustain, because we still live in this system, if you cannot sustain what you need at the voting booth, all of these other things can be easily undone by just getting other people into office. So without the Voting Rights Act, you have what happened in Texas, where people waiting in long lines. You have
7 hours, I saw.
Yeah,
7 hours.
exactly.
7 hours people were waiting to vote.
7 hours at a polling place near a historically Black college and university.
Right.
Wow.
5 hours in a part of Texas that was near a college campus as well.
Mm-hmm.
They've closed hundreds of polling places in the state of Texas in the last year.
Which tells you how important they are.
Which tells you how important it is.
Yeah.
You look at these red states, these states with Republican governors. There are all of these just really egregious acts to suppress the vote.
And I'm saying that we should expand it so that its coverage is universal, because previously Voting Rights Act only covered very certain specific jurisdictions that had a specific type of history. But here in the state of New York, we got voting suppression and vote dilution cases happening all the time. So everywhere where you have a school district, everywhere where you had, there's a whole host of ways in which the Voting Rights Act can prevent disenfranchisement of the community. So I say bring back the Voting Rights Act, but with universal coverage. Culturally responsive education.
Let's just sit there for a second, because if anybody waited longer than 2 hours to vote yesterday, I would love to hear from you. 866-801-8255.
I've waited longer than 2 hours to vote in Harlem before.
Have you?
There we go.
I don't know if
we had to go to court. Our Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College has a history of going into court on voting rights issues, because Black communities got all the old machines that you had to crank, and a lot of times the crank would break. So we had to go into court because we had to make sure that the equitable access to proper voting machines were going to be equally distributed. So that was in Brooklyn. That's in New York City. So it's a universal issue, and we often miss the importance of that.
I was in line, and, Harlem has, Thelma Golden was in line behind me. Don Lemon was in line. Don Lemon got on Twitter and started posting about how long the line was. This was 2016. 2018. It was in the midterms. And he actually tweeted out about it, and then they got new voting machines and people were coming down there. That literally happened to me.
It seems like celebrity and having a large following helps.
Yeah. Definitely having a journalist there, and a journalist with, a couple million followers there definitely helps.
Does not hurt.
Yeah.
But to be able to have to stand in line for 2 hours to do something that shouldn't, and so again, early voting is important.
Yeah.
Get out early, but if you can't, why is it?
But even with early voting, so here in the city of Troy, they had early voting, but they put the 2 early voting sites as far away from the Black and brown communities as they could, so that even though they had early voting, Black people could not access the poll sites. So that's why, and for me, I wouldn't necessarily say this is my number one, but this is definitely, these are in my top 5.
I like
things.
this. I need us to think through why something should be at the top of the list. And so you're telling me, Lurie and Drew, that voting's important.
Yeah.
That's what you're telling me, that it's so important.
Because this is where we live. I know y'all don't like it, but your ancestors chose to stay. They could have went to Liberia. They could have went to Nova Scotia, dealt with a whole other system, but you descended from those who chose to stay. So since we are here, and since you don't have an independent way of funding every single thing that we need in our community, this is what we got. We got to work this system.
And we got to work the system we got.
Yeah.
So and they don't want us to vote, which is why they're making it difficult, because they know how important voting is. Right. Okay, I just wanted to clear that up.
Yeah.
All right, what else do you have?
I have culturally responsive education such that Black children are able to graduate from school. And I'm saying Black because Black people are handing Joe Biden this presidency. So he owes us the ability to have an education mandate.
Ain't nobody else make a caveat.
Well, I'm just saying I'm Black specific right now.
Right,
I want everybody to be clear. Culturally responsive education such that Black children will graduate with the capacity to take their education and apply it directly to the needs of the community from which they come. We have all these other mandates and standards that say, when you graduate, you should be able to do this in math, and you should know this in history. I need Black children to not have the only option be to grow up in a school where you are taught how to speak white, learn white, and make white people comfortable enough that you can interview well and get a job working for white people, making white people dollars and solving their problems. So I want them to be able to graduate. I have friends who get MBAs who want to come back to the community. They don't know the first thing about Black-owned business. They don't know the first thing about Black economics. You need to be able to take your education and apply it directly to the needs of the communities from which you come.
How is that a federal program.
Because when you have someone like a Betsy DeVos in seat at the head of education, as opposed to someone like a Dr. Africana Carr, Dr. George Carr, Greg Carr in that position, you can create policies that will incentivize school spaces the same way they incentivize Leave No Child Behind. You had to meet certain mandates and tests. And if you're looking for how you determine whether or not your curriculum is culturally responsive, New York University has a program that helps you to evaluate your curriculum to see if it's going to be responsive to the needs of the community from which it comes. So there are metrics that we can go to that will say on a policy level, if you want to continue to receive funding, you're going to have a curriculum that is going to empower the students to address their particular community issues.
Well, there's already a mandate to teach Black history year-round, like in many states in the union. I think it might even be at the federal level, yet it's not enforced. The way the Brown versus Board of Ed desegregating schools in 1954
at all deliberate speed.
Right. Took 20 years.
Slow as hell is what they really meant. Right.
So,
and we're going backwards in large portions of the rural South and in rural Midwest.
Yeah.
There's
so how do we
schools
enforce,
fully
because
segregated.
individual states can make a determination that they're not going to do it.
Well, then
Funding.
they might not get access to the funding. And how are you going to keep your school open if you don't have access to the funding? But my third thing would be, we want 2 Supreme Court justices, not 1, because Biden owes us. Because of him, we have Clarence Thomas. I want 2 Supreme Court justices and a commitment to ensure black Supreme Court justices. Black,
not black, because Clarence Thomas is black.
No, I want black-centered judges.
Black-centered.
Yes.
So that could even be somebody that's not black.
Could be. But I'd got to see receipts.
Okay.
Yeah, they got to have a good history.
But with the judiciary at the Supreme Court level, I also want a commitment to ensuring that your appointees that you appoint at the federal level are going to reflect the population of Black people. So if we got 20% of Black people in this
we
nation,
fill out the census, 25.
we would know. Yeah. Right. Then I want to ensure that your appointees to the federal bench who get lifetime positions to be able to interpret the laws any which way it may come, they're going to actually have access and be on those positions. I want universal health care, and I want subprime.
Wait, what does that look like?
Universal health care looks like, I guess it could be Medicare for all. I think Elizabeth Warren's 2% tax and to use that formula to fund a healthcare system. And this is all legislation based, right? So this isn't just the presidency, but this is what we want: the president, the senators, the House of Representatives at the federal level, and then our local level representatives as well. I want subprime mortgages. If you have a subprime mortgage, I want you to have the ability to write down the value of whatever it is your mortgage is on, whether it be your home or if you have a subprime loan, so that people who are giving out these subprime racist toxic loans, I see you, Wells Fargo, I see you, all these banks who had to enter into settlements because of the racist products that you funneled into our community. If you do that, then you run the risk that when we are clear that your product was subprime, you lose the value of the loan that you gave such that it matches the actual value of the home. So when they over-assess the values in Black community in our homes, and then we got these inflated mortgages, and then the market crashed, we still had to pay these inflated mortgages, and most of us lost our homes because we could not sustain them. That home loan should be written down to the actual value of the home. I think you should also get student loan debt cancellation and or the ability to discharge. Sorry, I know.
It got good to her. Student loan debt cancellation. Is that across the board for everybody?
Across the board, and
just for Black people?
Black people. But when we rise, everybody rises, because that's just how we work. And or the ability to discharge student loans as a part of bankruptcy filings, which we do not have as a result of legislation that Joe Biden helped to usher through. He owes us those things.
Okay.
I love it.
You got anything to add, sir?
I mean, well, I got a couple of things to add here. Like I said, affordable housing with an eye towards home ownership and
I like that.
That for me is
all of that
is a big deal for me. I want health care for all, but I want the single payer option. That's my preference. I know that there's a lot of different ways that people can do it or whatever. I also want a referendum on policing with a civilian review.
Yes.
I want there to be civilian review of policing in major cities across the nation, but I also want at the federal level there to be a oversight and to look into policing as it is done in this country currently today. I definitely said restore the Voters Rights Act. I also think that there should be that we should reinstate the Presidential Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS. 42% of the new HIV diagnoses in this country right now are African American. That in the
42%.
40% of the new 42% of the new HIV diagnoses in this country are African American. HIV/AIDS is still a major issue for African Americans in this country. Quite honestly, the white LGBTQ community has essentially solved for HIV for white men, the primary folks who were suffering from HIV/AIDS, and it is now fallen way down on the agenda for LGBTQ advocacy groups, and African American advocacy groups are not addressing it. We have an administration that completely dismantled and defunded the Presidential Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS, and that it is still a clear and present danger for Black and brown people. It's also really important to me for us to look into reforming the cash bail system in this country. It is a $2 billion industry, and the industry disproportionately targets Black and brown people who are nonviolent offenders. The median bail bond amount represents 8 months of income for the typical detained defendant, which means that you no longer are innocent until proven guilty, because you are essentially jailed before you ever have a trial.
Yes.
And that is.
It's criminal.
It's
not fair.
It is criminal. It is not fair. We need to do something about it. It's predatory. It is a true tax on being poor. It is a poverty tax.
I agree.
Clay sent in a good one to supplement all this. A lot of his were already incorporated what we said, but he talked about police decertification, and that's something that Julian Castro was actually advocating. And basically, if you are a bad cop and we can show that you're a bad cop, you can't get hired as a cop anymore.
I have that on my list. I have that on my list.
Yes.
Yeah, and that there's a public record for brutal police that we can go to. There should be a registry that we can put in somebody's name. They should not be able to be hired again, but we should forever have that.
Right.
And on reverse of that, if you paid your debt to society, you should not have to check a box when you go to apply for a job, because that's been an impediment, or housing or anything, because what you've told me is I paid my debt.
Yeah.
So I shouldn't have to, if I was formerly a felon, because you know that that's going to prevent me from getting a job or housing. So either we clear the people of their scarlet letters or they wear them forever, but we can't have this back and forth, which also I believe federally marijuana should be legalized.
Yeah.
And I think there should be 25% of new marijuana businesses, cannabis businesses, set aside specifically for African Americans who were detrimentally and disproportionately impacted by the fake drug war on drugs, and particularly cannabis. So all new cannabis business, and there should be not just set asides, but they should not have to pay any money to get in. So it should also be free, and 25%, much like you were talking about, Drew, Maynard Jackson, 25% of all government contracts should also be set aside for Black people. And let's just restore Pell Grants to the formerly incarcerated.
Oh, I forgot one. Yes. You know, and I also added full funding for HBCUs. I don't know what that means. I don't know how much money it is. Every HBCU should get fully funded, and there should be 0% interest loans for home ownership in the Black community. And we need capital investment for Black-owned businesses. So I want to address poverty, but I also want to address the wealth gap. I want to address our ability to create economic sustainability.
I think there should be, when you dial 911, an option for the 911 person to send out a mental health professional instead of the cops. Because a lot of the cases are mental health, like Terrence Crutcher or whatever. Police should not be dispatched to something that is not really in their purview. And everything there, everything's not a nail that we need that hammer for. There should be a special division, like we have a fire department. There should be a mental health department that this federal government places into every state throughout the union, that there's a mental health department where you deploy mental health professionals to go out to handle. Maybe there's a different number. Maybe it's not 911. Maybe it's 511 or 611 or something. Is that already 777? Yeah. Something else. But that I think that's super important. It probably saved a lot of lives.
It is so important, Karen, because I feel like that a lot of times in our community, we are reluctant to call the police in certain situations where there needs to be some modicum of intervention. But we know what happens when the police show up in our homes or in our communities, and it's Black folks standing around or Black people doing anything, right? A Black male is 1 in 1,000 Black men will be killed by a member of law enforcement in this country in this year, right? Those are the stats for that. And so we are sometimes just reluctant to get police involved, even when we know that there needs to be some kind of intervention. And we need to be able to still call somebody.
And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, the president can't do that. Listen, whether it is something that is within the immediate purview of the presidency is not the issue. Are they going to use the bully pulpit to push it through?
Thank you.
Are they going to go down to the Senate, go down to the House, and work with the legislators to ensure that these policies are put into legislation and written into law and then sign those bills? So yes, there are some things that, you can wave a magic wand. You can appoint someone who is culturally competent in the education seat. You can appoint a number of judges. You can do all of those things, but you also get off your behind, head on down to the place where the people is meeting and work with them to get the legislation together. In fact, get the legislation from us, because the council will be working with Black-centered lawyers who will be drafting legislation so that it can be implemented. We'll give it to you, pass it.
Right.
Pass it.
Bingo.
And implore the DOJ to actually enforce the laws that are meant to protect the people.
Well, that means they would have to put the DOJ back together.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of putting back together that has to be required.
All right. Can Biden get it done? And who should be his vice president? We're going to talk more about that.